Antes de iniciar, les pedimos más dispositivos móviles para tener una mejor experiencia del evento. Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. La Administración y Economía Cooperativas tiene una mayor capacidad que la economía cooperativa para abordar los problemas del neoliberalismo global. Dr. Jerome Warren. La Dirección de Servicios Académicos, la Escuela de Negocios, le damos la más cordial bienvenida a esta nueva edición de Diálogos de Luz, con la presentación del libro The Routledge Handbook of Cooperative Economics and Management. Agradecemos a los directivos, académicos, colaboradores, egresores y estudiantes que nos acompañan, así como a nuestros invitados. Antes de dar inicio, les compartiremos que este evento se llevará en formato bilingüe, alternando algunos segmentos entre español e inglés.
En 2018, la UNESCO proclamó los valores y principios cooperativos como una herencia cultural intangible para la humanidad. 6 años después, necesitamos adentrarnos en esos conceptos y ponerlos en práctica en medio de un mundo más globalizado, pero también más polarizado. Es en este contexto que abrimos este espacio para comprender estos conceptos y visualizar su aplicabilidad en el entorno empresarial, organizacional y social. Invitamos a la maestra Angélica María Valencia Montoya, directora de Servicios Académicos, para que nos dirija unas palabras de bienvenida.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, teachers, students, academic directors. Thank you all for being here today. It is my great honor to welcome you to this significant event, where we will have the opportunity to explore and understand the transformative power of the cooperative economy at the hands of Dr. Jerome Warren and his book, The Routledge Handbook of Cooperative Economics and Management. Today, we stand not just as individuals, but as a community deeply committed to fostering an inclusive, equitable, and sustainable world. The cooperative model, recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage, embodies principles and values that are not only timeless, but also profoundly relevant to the challenges of our modern era. Cooperation, responsibility, solidarity, democracy, equity, and mutual aid, these are not merely words, but guiding lights that remind us of the power of working together toward shared goals. In an age where economic systems often prioritize individual gain over collective well-being, cooperatives stand out as living examples of an alternative path, one rooted in shared ownership, participatory governance, and a commitment to community impact. They show us that we can build systems that are inclusive, sustainable, and deeply human. This event is more than just a book presentation. It is an opportunity. Teachers, students, this is an opportunity to acquire invaluable knowledge and explore innovative ways to strengthen our perspective of the cooperative movement in the world. As we embark on this event, let us remember that cooperation is not just a strategy. It is a mindset, a value, and most importantly, a commitment. It is through this commitment that we can build a world where prosperity is shared, voices are heard, and no one is left behind. Thank you for being here, for your time and dedication, and for your belief in the cooperative spirit. Please enjoy the dialogue Dr. Cordova and Dr. Warren have prepared for you. Welcome, and let's get started.
Agradecemos a la maestra Valencia por sus palabras.
A continuación, invitamos a la maestra Alicia Ángeles Cortés, directora de la Escuela de Negocios, para que nos dirija un mensaje a propósito de la presentación de este libro, su temática y la importancia para el contexto administrativo y empresarial.
Buenas tardes, estimadas, estimados. Hoy nos reunimos para explorar una visión que desafía las bases tradicionales de la economía y que nos invita a reflexionar sobre cómo las empresas pueden generar valor más allá de los números, transformándose en agentes de cambio social y ambiental. Es un honor contar con la presencia del profesor Jerome, quien ha dedicado su vida a investigar y promover modelos económicos cooperativos, una propuesta audaz que pone la colaboración por encima de la competencia. Su trabajo no solo cuestiona los paradigmas actuales, sino que nos muestra cómo la integración y la unión de fuerzas pueden fortalecer los eslabones más débiles de las cadenas de valor, permitiendo una distribución más justa y participativa de los recursos y beneficios. En un mundo donde las desigualdades sociales y económicas son cada vez más evidentes, los modelos cooperativos defienden y nos ofrecen un camino hacia un capitalismo más humano y consciente. Uno que no solo busca maximizar las ganancias, sino también reducir las desigualdades, regenerar nuestros ecosistemas y dar voz a quienes históricamente han estado en desventaja. A través de la economía cooperativa, podemos avanzar en el cumplimiento de objetivos globales como la erradicación de la pobreza, ODS número 1, el crecimiento económico inclusive, ODS número 8, y la reducción de desigualdades, ODS número 10. Esta no es solo una teoría económica, es un llamado a la acción, una invitación a reimaginar el impacto que nuestras decisiones pueden tener en el mundo. Agradecemos al profesor Warren por traer esta valiosa propuesta a nuestro campus. Hoy, al escuchar su visión y adentrarnos en su obra, reflexionaremos sobre cómo podemos ser parte de esta transformación, cómo podemos construir una economía más equitativa y sostenible. We sincerely thanks for Professor Warren for bringing this valued proposal to our campus. Today, as we listen to his vision and delve into his work, let us reflect on how we can be part of this transformation and how we can contribute to building a more equitable and sustainable economy. Bienvenidos a este viaje hacia un futuro más colaborativo y justo. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos a la maestra Alicia Ángeles por su mensaje.
Para guiarnos en esta presentación nos acompaña el doctor Ignacio Cordova Espinosa. Miguel Cordova is a professor and researcher at the Business School at Tecnologico, Monterrey. He holds a PhD in Strategic Management and Sustainability. His research is oriented to power and influence, strategic management, sustainability, global supply chains, ocean freight, new space economy, and international business. Démosle un fuerte aplauso.
También nos acompaña nuestro invitado especial, el Dr. Jerome Warren. Jerome Nikolai Warren is a German-American political economist currently at the University of Cologne and Goethe University, Frankfurt, focused on the intersection between democracy, cooperation, sustainability, and business network. He's the lead editor of the Routledge Handbook of Cooperative Economics and Management, as well as the campaign volume Global Cooperative Economics and Movement, forthcoming from Routledge. He has conducted applied research on the cooperative economy of Italy, publishing on the evolution of Italian social and community cooperatives. Between 2022 and 2024, he has chaired SFPI at the Belgium Royal Academy of Arts, Science and Letters, advising the Belgian Sovereign Wealth Fund of strategies in helping make Belgian beers more sustainable. He's also an avid painter, singer, and photographer. Recibámoslos con un fuerte aplauso.
Thank you so much to all for coming to this event. We are delighted to have you here, Jerome. And first of all, welcome to Mexico, welcome to our campus, and thank you so much for coming and for preparing this presentation about your book. As a second thought, I think we need to congratulate you because of this achievement. Congratulations, I think this is a wonderful project that came to light recently, or it's about to come to light, right? So, congratulations for that, because we know that editing and writing, and not only writing, but also editing a book with so many authors, so many chapters, and trying to integrate all these perspectives of those authors and chapters. I can see your face of tiredness, because we know that it's extremely hard and it's extremely exhausting job, but also it's quite useful for the academia. It's useful for the students, also for researchers, on how you can provide new insights in terms of cooperative economics through this book. So congratulations for your hard work.
Muchas gracias.
Okay, we have this your cover of the book here, right? We launched this December.
I think the PDF will be available in 1 week. I think the 2nd of December, and the physical book will be delivered around Christmas. So you can give it to maybe your family members or.
For sure. Thank you very much. So, and for you all to know that Professor Jerome Warren has been recently in Canada. I mean, you came from Canada first. He started his tour in Canada, in Toronto, also in Montreal. Correct me if I'm wrong, please. Then in Chicago and to New Orleans. Also, you were in Boston as well? No.
Boston, New York, Washington D.C., Mobile, Alabama, so Kansas City, Missouri, so a lot of events.
And then he came to Mexico, now here in Pachuca with us, tomorrow in Guadalajara. It's going to be tomorrow, right?
The event is the day after tomorrow.
Okay. Anyway, so it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be part of this huge tour that Professor Jerome is making in presenting his great contribution to science and to business field.
So maybe if I can just correct one thing, this is not just my own project, and it's not my book. This is a collective effort, and I mean we are 4 editors: Lucha Vigiero, Jenny Liebman, Kenny Obenidi, who could not be here today, and of course we have 36 wonderful chapters by many more authors. So it's not just my book, and I just wanted to say.
Thank you so much. Okay, my first question for today is, I think it's an obvious one. Sorry for that, but it's about what's in there. What's in the book? I mean, what someone who buy the book, who can read the book, what she or he could expect to find in the book, and also what do you think could be this book's main contribution to the field of business?
Para comentar, muchas gracias por invitarme. Es mucho gusto estar aquí. mi español no es perfecto. Voy a cambiar inglés. Espero está bien. Okay. So, this book, maybe just speaking from my own personal perspective, is the result, and it's not a singular effort. It's not just my project, but from my perspective, the reason that I joined the project or initiated the project or became part of the project is I studied economics myself for many years and was very frustrated at the lack of attention that's paid in economics to cooperation. If you study economics, you learn that businesses compete in the market, and by competing, they basically succeed. Those who are the most competitive are those that survive. If you're less competitive, you disappear. Of course, if you look in reality, this is not the case, and you see many networks of businesses that work together every day to produce value. And so the book is the result of the efforts to fill a gap that I perceived and that others also perceived in the existing research in the literature. So we wanted to provide a broad audience, which includes teachers, students, the broad public, policymakers, legislators, for instance, a resource that would bring together numerous discussions. And is a very broad discussion, so there are many different aspects of the book. We cover as well economics and management. So we wanted to bring together the community of research and the community of practice that is focused on issues of cooperation in both business and management as well as cooperation. So again, we want to address this broad audience and give them a resource that they can then refer to and learn more about these topics. So it's not a book to be read like a novel, not like you're reading Don Quixote, you start from page 1 and go to the end, but it's to be a resource for those who are interested in these topics and who want to learn more, and a starting point, not the end, I would say.
Muchas gracias. Es muy interesante, es muy interesante cuando desde la investigación científica encontramos un vacío en los estudios actuales, en la literatura, y pues podemos encontrar los recursos necesarios para poder llenar ese vacío y que pueda ser justamente útil para que otros investigadores puedan construir sobre esas bases, y además también para poder movilizarnos en nuestras clases en el campo de los negocios. We have some of the screens from your table of contents if you want to show them.
Sure. Yes, so this is the table of contents. I don't want to summarize each chapter because this is supposed to be a discussion and not going to church, because of catechism. So basically, we divided the book into 5 sections, and each section has numerous chapters between 7, as you see, 6, 7 to 10 chapters, and they have different points of focus. The first section is really looking at economic theory and looking at foundations, attempting to discover foundations of economic theory based on cooperation. So there are numerous chapters that really go into different areas of economic theory, how one can develop economic theory based on not competition as a selection mechanism, but cooperation. So the first 3 chapters deal with the mainstream economic theory, which you see today in the form, for instance, of new institutional economics and transaction cost economics within that. For the young students here, I will not go into detail there, but those 3 chapters, I would say, go together. Looking at things like relationships. It's not just about transactions in a market where you have a price and you have someone who's buying a product and someone who's selling a product, but in fact there are relationships that are established in the economy, and these occur over time. So things like trust and opportunities for cooperation are very important for that. Then we look at things like going beyond European or Eurocentric notions of economy. Maybe just to highlight one single chapter, chapter 5, by T. Omolefe, which looks at African ethics and looks at the African principle of Ubuntu as a principle for founding an economic theory, because it says that relationships, again, are what matters. And you can have relationships with people, with organizations, with animals, with nature. And so really challenging this self-perception, even of the cooperatives, which have a very European-centric system of 7 principles and values. So anyway, there are 7 of those chapters here, looking at various issues relating to founding or basing economic theory on cooperation. Section 2 looks at methodology. This is one of my favorite sections. As I said, I was a student of economics, and this section really is an attempt to provide researchers and students some introductions to methodologies and methodological approaches that can be useful for studying cooperation. Because some of the methodologies that we learn in economics courses are not very useful. This is our opinion. So we have numerous chapters here looking at even things like accounting. How can we look at accounting in a way that promotes a more egalitarian or equal notion of value? So just that very first chapter looks at accounting from the perspective of workers, whereas typically accounting is looked at from the perspective of investor, return on investment, return on equity. And so this is a challenge to define accounting, which somebody might say is a very boring topic, but once you get into a more provocative or experimental view towards these subjects, the result can be very interesting and very engaging. I wrote myself a chapter looking at process-oriented research methodologies, but I'm not here to advertise my own work. Just the point of these chapters is to show the diversity of approaches that are available to study cooperation, which includes the very last chapter by Camila Carabini, looking at anthropology. So going into organizations and studying how these organizations work is one of the elements that we feel is very important to understanding how cooperation works, not only in theory but in practice. And many times economists and sometimes business scholars, management scholars, have no understanding of how do I study these things. So moving beyond things like regression analysis and statistics to really understanding what's going on in practice. Section 3 is maybe the most interesting section for Miguel and for students of business, because this is a section that's very much focused on management, including entrepreneurship. And what we really try to do is look at topics like innovation and leadership, finance, from the perspective, again, of cooperation. So we're not looking at innovation only in the form of technology. There's new technology like ChatGPT or whatever, but we also look at that. But we're looking specifically from the social aspects of innovation, which includes topics like social innovation. How does one reconfigure organizations in a way that can increase their effectiveness? So, for instance, there's a chapter here on I'm looking for it. It's a chapter by Simon Peck, for instance, chapter 19, that looks at lotteries as ways to increase and broaden an organization's leadership. For instance, in cooperatives, you have democratic member control, but oftentimes in a cooperative, in practice, you have the same leadership year and year again, because some members perhaps are scared to even try to join leadership and put themselves up for election. So the idea of having the lottery could be one of having more rotation and having more inclusive leadership. Also things like learning as an organization, learning democracy. So democracy is not something that falls from the sky, but is a practice. So the feedback effect between learning in an organization and developing or establishing those democratic practices is something that is discussed, for instance, in chapter 18. And so there are many more topics that are discussed in this section, looking at the growth and size of organization and how there is a trade-off between size and democracy. So once an organization gets very big, like Amazon, it's very difficult to have a democratic basis for that. And so on. So there are many chapters here. Section 4 looks at innovation. Again, as I mentioned, we're looking at issues of social innovation, not just technological innovation. We have here the chapter by Carmen Guzman and others that looks at cooperatives having a contribution to social innovation. There's a chapter here, actually I mixed it up, this was the one on leadership, I apologize. It's chapter 24 by Louis Couson, looking at distributed and collective forms of leadership. So the practices in cooperatives oftentimes are copied, so copy and paste from traditional organizations because the resources are often not there. So we are trying to provide an understanding, even for cooperators in businesses, how does one develop a more distributed or collective form of leadership, not just one person in a pyramid, that is at the top. We were yesterday at Teotihuacan, you have the pyramids there, and many organizations are in the form of a pyramid, but we can have a circle or another form of leadership. So these are just topics that we're trying to provide space to. And I can go on about many of the other chapters. And this is the very last section, as I make the joke. The last section is a very unimportant topic, sustainability. It's a joke. It's a very important topic. So we're looking at really the understanding of the connection between cooperatives and cooperation and sustainability. And one of the results of the chapters in this section is we need to understand this connection better. So for instance, the chapter 31 by Andreas Exner and Dirk Reich is a literature review about the connection between sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social economy. And their result, just to give you the outcome, spoiler alert, is that we need to understand more. The understanding right now is not sufficient. So this is, in fact, many of the chapters here are an invitation to expand knowledge. We are inviting young scholars to contribute to these discussions because, again, today the understanding is not sufficient. So just one other example from the section is chapter 34, which looks at the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain, in the Basque region. And their suggestion is, it's not the case to say, oh, Mondragon cooperative, it's sustainable, everything's good. No, they say that there is a tension. There's a tension between the economic interests of the members who want to make money to feed their families and have a house, and also the long-term interests of sustainable transformation. So they don't say that it's a solution, build cooperatives and everything will be good. They are saying there is a tension and there needs to be a way, including the members in a democratic dialogue, of basically managing and balancing that tension.
Thank you very much. Creo que me quedé pensando en esta perspectiva desde el trabajador, que normalmente las teorías de management y business no tienen tienen una perspectiva más de negocio como unicelular, pero no en su integración con otras organizaciones, ni tanto desde la perspectiva del trabajador, ¿sí? Muy interesante, y seguramente los estudiantes están encontrando nexos, vínculos con lo que hemos visto en las clases acerca del liderazgo. Muy interesante cómo es que se pueden encontrar diferentes formas de generar cooperación al interior de la organización, entre los stakeholders de la empresa, dentro de la empresa, pero además también fuera de la organización, con diferentes agentes, con diferentes stakeholders externos, y que a partir de esta colaboración se puede encontrar nuevos vehículos, nuevos caminos hacia sistemas de innovación, hacia sistemas de mayor eficiencia para las organizaciones, e incluso hacia el alcanzar objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Muy bien, creo que es una plática muy interesante y estamos encontrando muchos vínculos con las temáticas que tratamos en la Escuela de Negocios. Do you understand Spanish, right?
So this topic of desarrollo sustentable, this is certainly a discussion that this book can contribute to, especially these last chapters. I think it's 8 chapters, 7 chapters. For instance, the very first one by Molly Scott Cato is a challenge. The title, Why a Green and Resilient Future Must Be a Cooperative Future. So many times we just have the COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. There is, as you say in English, a lot of lip service, a lot of talking, a lot of palabras about sustainability. And the topic of greenwashing, of course, is a very real one. So the chapters in this volume do suggest, in this section rather, do suggest that there is a need to connect this ideal, this goal of desarrollo sustentable with concrete practices, and embedding those within democratic organizations is one way, one tool. It's not the only one. Other ways are things like ESG, these types of topics. But one way to do it, one alternate approach, is to create organizations that are, by their nature, in the DNA, accountable to a diversity of stakeholders, including workers, consumers, and others, members of society, not just having investors, which are usually the wealthy, deciding how to invest, and then having everyone else accept, basically, what that decision is. So it's moving from the ex post, after the fact, decision to ex ante, whether it's an inclusive dialogue in the production of the value itself.
Sure. I think there's a lot of space for businesses to do in this very beginning, right, of the processes that they usually don't see. And I was very excited about looking at the table of contents, because I could find many friends, authors of the chapters, and I think it's wonderful to have this diversity of ways of how we can conduct the cooperative economics, and how we can incorporate or gain more sustainability and also innovative processes through cooperation. One of the things that I want to highlight also is that the Professor Jerome was emphasizing about relationships, right? I think relationships, and this is one of the topics that we included in our business curricula. Relationships in terms of networks, of business networks, are quite important for us to promote these innovative systems, these innovative ecosystems, as well as our sustainable initiatives. So I have the next question here. My second question for you today is focused of this specifically in these cooperative systems, this cooperative economy, this cooperative business models, right? How do you think this, and I think this will be very important for the students here in the audience, how these cooperative models can actually turn the tide in the current capitalist systems, how it's working so far, currently. How these novel structures of cooperativism can actually do some structural changes in how capitalism is conducted today.
That's a good question, and it's an excellent question. In my opinion, and I think that from the chapters in the book, the idea of having a principles-based enterprise is an important tool, an important mechanism towards transforming the economy generally. So there's a disconnect between markets and the economy as a whole, as a macro phenomenon, and the individual agency and operations of individual enterprises, individual firms. So the basis. If you have a firm that is based only on seeking profits and exploiting resources, whatever those resources are, we talk about human resources or natural resources and so on, then it's very difficult for that firm to engage in a transformative process because it's not a resilient organization, typically. Of course, there are always exceptions. The DNA of this firm is based on the mechanism of seeking out new mechanisms for generating profit. The idea of transforming or participating in a transformation, whether climate, social, or otherwise, is at best is an add-on This is why we have the problem of greenwashing, because many companies, I'm not going to name any names, are not designed to be sustainable. So their very foundation is not compatible with the needs that society and the ecosystem has today. So this is where cooperatives can come in. They are principles-oriented firms. There's a catalog of values, international, that's accepted by the cooperative movements and federations, which exist here. Mexico exists in other countries. So these are 7 basic values. You have open membership. Of course, this comes from a time where discrimination was very present, where, for instance, if you were a member of the wrong religion, a Protestant, for instance, or you were a member of an ethnic group, you would be excluded. So cooperatives have as their foundation open membership. Anyone, if you're a woman, if you're gay, if you're a minority, if you're a religious group that's unwanted, you can be a member. They are required to be open to your membership. The democratic member participation, which says members are required to participate in their organizations. This is already radical. This sounds like a Marxist in a way. It's not. I mean, it's democracy in the workplace and in other places of business. So there are these 7 principles. I don't have to go through all of them. And these already are very open towards a transformation or a transformational goal. And I mentioned the chapter by Carmen Guzman and her co-authors. This is exactly their purpose in the chapter, is to connect cooperative principles to the practice of social transformation. And so if we talk about transforming the economy or transforming capitalism from within, yes, okay, there's one way to destroy things and totally start new. I don't think that's going to succeed. And in my studies, in my research, the way to successfully transform capitalism will necessitate including a broader class of stakeholders, including young people, including workers, including other types of indigenous tribes and so on. And I think these values are an excellent vehicle towards that. You also have connections to movements. So cooperatives are embedded in larger social movements. As which I don't remember your name, so you introduced me, you mentioned there's a 2nd volume coming out, Global Cooperative Economics and Movements, which is coming out next year. I can come back and have a second one. So the main topic of this 2nd volume will connect these issues to the practices on the ground globally. So there are cooperative movements in China. We will have a chapter about China. There will be chapters about Latin America, about various countries in Africa. So the point is, you have existing networks, existing movements that can connect to exactly these issues. And again, the social transformation and the challenge of sustainability is facing a lot of these enterprises already. So they're dealing with these problems. And so even things like how to deal with profit, cooperatives usually have very strict rules about dealing with profit. You cannot just buy a Lamborghini, or a helicopter, and so on. Usually, most of the profits of cooperatives, which are not non-profit, cooperatives can make a profit. Many people have a mistake that cooperatives are a charity organization. It's not a foundation, it's not a charity, it's a company, but it's a democratic company that usually reinvests the profits into building a cooperative movement or into the organization itself. So it's the idea of moving away from individuals to a more of a collective notion of value generation. So to me, all of this is essential for exactly this question, and it's kind of in the DNA.
Thank you so much. I like very much this conversation, because I remember that when we were with some colleagues in Europe, in a conference in Europe, we were discussing about this kind of socialist ideas, right? And some of the audience were thinking about that this kind of cooperativism, but also inclusiveness, more participation, more democratic economy could be something like socialist ideas, but actually in the way that we can reinforce the property, and we can reinforce the economic earnings, the economic benefits of the corporations or businesses, and also in the way that we can reinforce the relationships within the organization. Actually, we are reinforcing capitalism, right? So, es muy interesante esta discusión. porque en la medida que podamos encontrar estas formas de fortalecer los lazos al interior de la organización y que podamos encontrar una mayor inclusión y participación de las personas, en definitiva estamos fortaleciendo la creación de negocios, pero más saludables, más incluyentes, más para el futuro. Then it's a little bit controversial perhaps nowadays, but actually if you think a little bit deeper, this conversation actually, I mean, perhaps it's not a specific reinforcement of the capitalist system as it is right now, but actually it's a shift towards a better capitalism, right?
There's in fact a book by Louis Kelso and Mortimer Adler, a very old book from I think the 1960s. It's called The Capitalist Manifesto. and the point of their book, and Louis Kelso, as you probably know, is one of the founders of the ESOP movement in the United States, the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, which is, we actually talk about in Tate Bonsar and David Ellerman and Costa Yulis chapter 16. Looking at ways to convert traditional enterprises into more inclusive companies. So the idea is not only to start cooperatives, but it could also be to convert any company, big companies, small companies, old companies, especially those that are successful, into more inclusive companies. And again, in this book, The Capitalist Manifesto, they suggest that over time, the amount of value that is generated by capital versus labor increases, so that any future stable economy will require a more equal distribution of the ownership of capital. So the idea of converting these these companies into cooperatives is not only ideological, but is essential for stabilizing the economy. Because if we don't do it, it will create social unrest. I know there's been some unrest here in Ciudad Mexico recently, and this will increase over time as the temperature increases through global warming, and as those means of producing value are more and more concentrated. This is a recipe for social and environmental disaster. So in many ways you're right, Miguel, you have to save capitalism from itself. And you can save it by broadening the ownership of shares in companies. That's one major element.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jerome. I have one last question before going to the questions from the audience. My last question is about these main constraints or limitations that some businesses could find by looking for cooperative systems. I mean, if they want to cooperate, which constraints they can find, which are the most common constraints, usual constraints that they can find to prevent them to cooperate and to collaborate with each other?
To me, this is a very strange question. Thinking about this question, I would ask a question in response. Do they have problems? So, in my research, as you mentioned in the introduction, I worked with the Belgian Sovereign Wealth Fund for 2 years and studied the Belgian economy. I did not talk mainly with cooperatives. I talked with many different firms, very large multinational companies. And what I found very interesting, the topic was sustainability. What I found was that these companies, and these are just very traditional capitalist enterprises, they are cooperating. They're cooperating every day. So they have Zoom meetings once a month. There's this group called CEOs for 2030, which is a group of CEOs, the jefes of the company, which are meeting once a month on Zoom, and they are sharing knowledge about what is your company doing to improve the carbon footprint, what is your company doing, oh, that's an interesting project, maybe we can apply that. So this cooperation is happening, and to me the question is one of whether the cooperation, and my co-editor, Lucio Vigiero, I mentioned one of the co-editors of the Handbook, he wrote a book recently last year about interfirm networks. And they looked at the European aerospace industry, creating airplanes. And it's about 2,800 companies in the EU and in Europe generally. And there's so many connections. Again, these are traditional companies, not cooperatives. They share managers, they share board members. And so obviously the board members between the companies, I think he found one that was an individual, one person who was on 2,000 boards. Obviously, this person is not actively involved, but what that means is there's shared knowledge. They're sharing information and they're communicating. So to me, the question is then, who benefits? Cui bono is the old question. So, and I think that back to the last discussion of the capitalist manifesto and these concepts, if we don't have a more inclusive sharing of knowledge, we will increasingly stratify society, and you'll have a small group of the creme de la creme, which has everything, and the others who are the great mass who have nothing. And this is again a recipe for disaster. So to me, it's not a question of the constraints that businesses find to cooperate. They are cooperating, but it's a question of who is benefiting from this cooperation. If Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are cooperating with Trump, none of us in this room, I'm sure, will benefit from that. And I think that if we change the way that organizations are, rather to who they're accountable, then we all stand to benefit. And so just, again, these kinds of models, and I think one of the constraints to creating more inclusive networks is the limitations of capital, because traditionally workers, students, and other similar classes of stakeholders do not have assets, savings. So the question of creating ownership that contributes to a broadened base is certainly, that is a constraint to answering this question. And so again, this type of model that again our friend Tecnologico and David Jerome talk about in their chapter, I think is an important element of that. So their innovation is, again, they take the American ESOP model, which creates a trust, a separate legal entity that buys the shares of the company over time. So it does not happen in one day, it happens over sometimes 10 years. There's a tax benefit. And so the owners of the company can sell the company to a trust that is acting in the interest of the workers. And what Gonza and Ellerman have done is to say, well, why do we need a trust? Trust implies we don't trust the workers, that they need someone who is acting in their interest. And they suggest, well, leave the trust out, create a cooperative. So the special purpose vehicle that's buying the shares is itself a cooperative, so that over time you convert the company from a société anonyme, I guess you call it here, towards a cooperative. So in the end, this is a way, for instance, if we have a company like Amazon, say, you can convert Amazon into a cooperative in this way. Again, by creating incentives as well, so that everyone benefits, creating these kinds of win-win situations. So Bezos or whoever has a tax benefit for selling shares to workers. And to me, this is exactly a problem for creating more, rather inclusive cooperation. Cooperation is already happening, so we can see every day.
Sí, sumamente interesante ver desde la relación de cooperación quién es el que se beneficia, who is getting the benefit from this cooperation. So thank you very much for this insightful conversation, and Janine and Victor, the floor is yours.
Agradecemos al doctor Cordova y al doctor Warren por esta interesante presentación e invitamos ahora al público a participar. Abriremos un espacio de 15 minutos para preguntas y respuestas. Si alguien tiene algún comentario o pregunta, puede levantar la mano para acercarse al micrófono. Sus preguntas pueden ser en inglés o en español.
Hello. My question is, what was your motivation, inspiration, or a key moment that led you to do studies on economic cooperatives and participate in the creation of this book? I mean, was there a specific moment that motivated you to participate?
What's your name?
Isabella.
Isabella. Muchas gracias. It's an excellent question, and as was mentioned, I gave a lot of talks on this tour, and one of them was at my old high school in Mobile, Alabama. And I try to focus exactly on these kinds of questions because I think this is useful for young people to not only learn about the final product, oh, I'm a successful scholar, yes, you see my face, and so on. I've also experienced many difficulties in my life. I come from a very poor background. My father was a veteran in the U.S. Army. Neither my parents went to university. My father did not finish high school. So I did not grow up very wealthy. And it was only through cooperation, I would say, by my teachers, other people in my life, that I was able to even have a foundation for success. So I would say that that's the beginning that interested me in this topic. So when I learned about competition and all these various other things, I thought this is not what I experienced. I also had some mentors in my life who advised me and who, I would say, provided feedback. So it's one thing to have an intrinsic interest to begin with, a foundation of interest. It's another thing to know where to look. It's like being in a library. You have millions of books. Which one should I read? So having mentors was also something that helped me to concentrate and focus. And I had one particular professor, one that I dedicate my dissertation to. He died, unfortunately, now 11 years ago, who inspired me in this regard to follow these interests. And then also one individual, additionally, who also unfortunately passed away last year, who was just a manager of a housing cooperative in Baltimore, who always pointed to cooperatives as something very interesting. And so when I had the chance to write a thesis for my master's program, I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to go back to this topic of cooperatives. Charlie, the manager I mentioned, had always kind of insinuated this topic. So my partner Thomas was taking pictures, and I took a research trip to Italy, and I just went, without any knowledge, just naive, what is this? And we went to visit cooperatives in Rome, and in Florence, and in Bologna, and to me this was an amazing experience. It opened my eyes to this whole world of cooperatives. I didn't even know what questions to ask. So it was a new topic, and I think that this connection between having an interest, having the right mentors to motivate you, and having those connections to practical experiences. I was visiting the enterprise. I saw how they built. One was a glass factory. They made glass products like vases and so on. You see, this is not theory. This is actual practice. And to me, when I finished writing my little 75-page thesis, I had many more questions than I had answers. And that's my kind of middle, not short, not long answer. I could talk much more. And that's what motivated, I would say, what ended up to be this project.
Okay, thank you for sharing this information that I think that is very important and very awesome to know. But my question is, how can companies ensure that they will have a good behavior and responsible and ethical in the organization?
What's your name? Makeda. Okay. You mean responsible for what you...
About all the sustainable innovation, because I think the organization now is very important to be like the individuals together.
Okay, thank you for this question. I would say that if you look at OpenAI right now, with ChatGPT, this is a great example for a bad case of generating value. So you had an organizational structure which was a trust that had so to speak, the privilege of intervening in the actual operative organization. And then, of course, when they had a gold mine or oil mine, so to speak, a very valuable idea, they threw away this model. So to me, there has to be quite a statutory, a very clear constitutional element to these things. It cannot just be an informal agreement, which we see all the time. There are informal agreements, and the situation changes, and then the agreement is gone. So there is one chapter in the handbook, I think it's chapter 14, by Colleen Serre, very interesting chapter, which is about companies, not about cooperatives. And her question is, how can companies actually realize their social value beyond profit? And she uses, I don't know if any of you know Eleanor Ostrom, the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics, and today only one of 2 women, so it's a very white, male-dominated science, which is why I recommend more women go into economics. But she studied self-organizing communities who manage resources like fishing ponds and rivers, forests, similar things, and developed 8 principles by which communities can self-manage these resources. Very interesting principles based on practice, not on theory. This is what people are doing in Japan and Switzerland and Turkey and other places in the world, I'm sure here as well. And so Claudine in her chapter tries to understand how companies, for-profit companies, can apply these principles into managing the resources that they're managing as commons. I know you have the learning commons here in the university. This is a very important concept. Commons means that it is accessible to everyone. You don't exclude people. And the idea of having a commons within a company, it seems like a very radical idea. But let us imagine another version of ChatGPT, another version of OpenAI, where again the large language model is a commons, because it's using all of our information, so it should be a commons. So that's just one idea. This is a very complex question. I think we could talk about this, have a seminar for 2 weeks on this topic. Maybe you should organize one.
Thank you. Hello. I don't know if this is a good question, but I've heard from your book, well, not your book, collective book, some cases like China, United States, some Switzerland, and those countries really have cultural issues on their population, and I understand that there are these affects the economic structure of some companies. But have you ever had a curiosity on studying the company structures in Mexico? I understand that here we have some difficulty in our cultural, we have a really strong cultural companies that it's more like we benefit the boss, for example. And have you had, the question just is like, have you had curiosity on studying the companies in Mexico, or how to apply these concepts to some companies including Mexico?
I have not in particular had the pleasure to study or the privilege to study companies here in Mexico. I have done some more informal studies of some companies in Argentina. There's a very interesting ecosystem there of what we call empresas recuperadas por sus trabajadores, which are companies during the financial crisis in Argentina, which is still ongoing today. It started in 2001, which result basically companies whose owners, the jefe, owed the workers wages as the currency was devaluing, the value of the wages was decreasing, and so the owners would just stop paying because they assumed if I pay next week it'll be less money for me, and then 2 weeks later even less, so I just won't pay, which meant that the workers were the greatest creditors of the company. And in the end they took over the companies, and through the experience of taking over the companies they learned to manage themselves, which is a very interesting evolutionary process, which was not voluntary, it was necessary, and many workers only wanted to go to work from 9 to 5, but they learned through the process of taking over the company that they were capable of managing themselves. And my friend Marcelo Vieta, who wrote a chapter, co-wrote a chapter in the book, chapter 18, with 3 co-authors, and who is writing a chapter in the companion volume on exactly these empresas recuperadas, has studied Argentina quite extensively, and he studied Costa Rica and other countries in Latin America. So it's a very interesting situation south of the border, as you say, in Rio Grande, and even further south. And we will feature discussions about other countries in Latin America in the companion volume. Uruguay, there's a chapter I know about Colombia, a chapter about university cooperative spin-offs. So the spin-off from university is a very interesting topic, where you have many companies that emerge from research projects in universities, and oftentimes these are then turned into profit companies. And in Colombia, there's the Universidad Cooperativa, and they are creating specifically cooperatives as a spin-off, so that again they are providing value to the community and not to just a single shareholder. But I'm very open to learning more about the situation specifically in Mexico, but I personally don't have that knowledge.
Agradecemos a todos y a todas por su participación. Le pedimos ahora al maestro Octavio Díaz Barriga, director del campus, que haga entrega de las constancias de participación a nuestros invitados y un obsequio especial al Dr. Warren. Como ha llegado a su término este conversatorio.
Agradecemos mucho su presencia y que tengan un buen día.
Muchas gracias. 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 Debemos de buscar cuál es la chispa que pueda atraer a los chicos. ¿Chispa? Yeah, the spark. We need to find out the spark to be attractive for the guys, for the new generation. Yes. I think at the time I was hearing you, I was thinking maybe you with your editors, you can find out like a canvas or something, like a step by step, find out what is interesting for these guys, because they're gonna be the ones who will build this cooperative with a valuable instead profit. I think it's a great congratulations.
Mucho gusto. To me, always important to not compromise on certain principles. This is why ¿cómo se dice en español? Stubborn?
Necedad.
Necedad. Somebody
stubborn. Follow the person.
Well, he knows that's me. Yeah.
So just to make sure. Oops.
Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.